Hello and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Hype. I'm Alfred Jr., Senior Vice President, Executive Editor at Large at Black Enterprise, and I have a truly special guest for our conversation today. First of all, you guys know our National Entrepreneur Summit is coming up in less than a week, and we are really honoring and celebrating Black entrepreneurship in addition to putting together a program designed to help them to grow and scale and be successful in their businesses, and even those who are just starting businesses. One of the centerpieces of that event is our annual business awards, and I have here today a person who I actually started getting to know before I knew she was going to get this award, but I was very excited to find out that our committee was actually considering her for an award. And I'm talking about none other than Dr. Kimberly McGlonn, who is the founder of Grant Boulevard, the creator of the Build It Boldly community, her podcast, School for Disruptors, but more importantly, Grant Boulevard has been selected as our Business Disruptor of the Year. Welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Hello, good people. Hey, Alfred, I'm so happy to be here and, just drop in with you and talk about all the things. So thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm ready whenever you are. We can get to it.
Well, the reason I was interested in you even before I knew that Black Enterprise was going to be recognizing you is because we just had this conversation before we went on set about just being able to find interesting people and getting to know people and shrinking that distance, that artificial distance that was created without social media, but now proximity is no longer a limitation. Mm-hmm. I'm a fashion person. I don't know if I didn't tell you that. I love fashion. I love style. My original career goal was to get to either GQ or Esquire. Then I got to Black Enterprise. I found out that was really home. And so I got fascinated by learning more about Grant Boulevard and fashion, sustainability, environmentalism, social justice, and the way that you have been able to pull all of those values together in a successful business, which is, again, the Business Disruptor Award went to you. So I was already interested in you because she got fly stuff, but she's doing this with, how does that work? Because people talk about that. So I really want to do a deep dive in this conversation and give our audience the beyond the hype understanding of what it really means to create a the social enterprise, a socially aware, impactful business that is actually a business that actually produces product. Because some people are really good at the social side, not the business side.
Yeah.
And some people are good at the business side and they're really fronting on the social impact side. So why don't we start with you kind of telling your story, how you came to be who you are and what you're doing, what led you down this path, and what Grant Boulevard and the Build It Boldly community is all about.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I founded this company in 2017 and I had been a teacher for a long time. And even in thinking about my role as CEO, I still think about myself as teacher, as I think about Grant Boulevard. And for those of y'all who are just being introduced to Grant Boulevard, it is a sustainable apparel brand. And we'll talk about how I define sustainability, but what we aspire to do with a lot of fidelity. So this is about dedication and commitment and really making decisions, micro decisions from a perspective of fidelity to those values, is we try to figure out how can we disrupt in the fashion space by centering, how my team we're a women-led team, Black women-owned company. How do we bring into the sustainable fashion space our aesthetic in terms of how we think about storytelling through garments, texture and textiles and color? How do we bring everything that is true of us as Black women into a space that has been really unfriendly to Black folk, which is by and large conversations about sustainability kind of generally. Sustainability is a conversation, Alfred, and I'm sure you've heard about this and seen it and, just in observation. It's a conversation that's been so dominated by white folk, in large part because sustainability has, at least in the language of sustainability, has been kind of preoccupied with future thinking. And, for so many of us, we're trying to figure out how to survive a landscape that is already so riddled with just challenges, right? As Black folk, even though we, as it were, come from a very long lineage of having to figure out how to reimagine, how to repurpose, how to reuse. So in a lot of ways, we have been the stewards of sustainability, as people who've arrived on this land. And, that's a tradition that began with the First Nation folk who were here before we were brought to this land. And so it's been interesting for me to be thinking about how can I do that kind of disruption in an industry, the fashion industry, again, specifically, that is so disinterested in thinking about the planet, is so disinterested in thinking about its impact on women and girls in particular, and is so rooted in exploitation. So Grant Boulevard, sustainable apparel brand, committed to thinking about this new intersection, right? How do we design garments that are sourced responsibly? And that's a whole little sidebar, you know, how are we thinking about, sourcing in our supply chain? But how do we center sustainability, but also use our manufacturing capacity as we develop it to center folks, particularly women, who are criminal system impacted, right? So for us, that means thinking about the way forward in fashion, which is how do we create living wage jobs, particularly for women who, you know, are just the first to be disenfranchised and the first to be marginalized, and, you know, the first to be ignored. So it's just that kind of intentional thinking is really what I aspire to do through business.
See, that's what fascinates me about you and your business, because you weaved, pun intended, fashion weave, get it, but weave together so many different themes, but in a way that's cohesive as both a model for sustainability and social impact and a model for business. I mean, you just the point you make about sustainability and the environmentalism movement being a predominantly white movement focused on the future, when the truth is it's a present impact that impacts people of color, Black people, poor people, way more than many of the people on the front lines. You know, so when you talk about environmental racism, when you talk about everything from the Flint water crisis to where the most toxic areas, we just did a town hall on health and wellness and trying to extend the length of life and quality of life of Black people. And the point was made that when you look at a certain area of New Jersey, and the doctors call it Cancer Alley because it is lined with, and the reason why there's so much cancer cases coming out of this Black neighborhood is because of the environment of that neighborhood. So we are the most impacted in the present, but the conversation is always future focused and predominantly white. And so I just think that was a word just there, just saying all of that.
For fact. Yeah. And, you know, and I think about the ways in which, you know, from a business planning kind of perspective, how all of us who are thinking about business ownership and business leadership, you know, really we don't have a whole lot of explicit models for how to develop even our language about how do we center sustainability and climate action in our decision making. You know, what's the spectrum of choices that we can make, that we can consider, that we can reconsider, as a way of trying to even build it into our business model, and by extension, our legacies as leaders, right? I think of all of us who are in business ownership as leaders, and in our local communities and the global community. How can we differently take a leading role in terms of what consumers are demanding from businesses, and how we're thinking about what we produce or what we offer, if it's a service, how it can be elevated in its responsiveness to what it is that we're facing right now, you know? And I don't think that the solution to all of these crises is thinking about the environment, thinking about our criminal system. Those solutions will not explicitly come. They never have come almost, you know, exclusively from government. It's going to take all of us getting to this new front line of just experimentation, you know? So when I think about even what we're doing at Grant Boulevard and what we have on deck, you know, what we've achieved and what we're working towards, I think of it as, you know, it's not that we have all the answers. We're working through a framework, and we're doing what I think is just a new kind of experimentation in business design and business strategy. So yeah, it's a lot of it is adventuring. It's like having an hypothesis, you know, thinking back to those high school science classes, you know, where it's like you have a hypothesis and you test it and you get some data, and then you know, business is about being nimble. That's what it means to be a business owner in any moment in human history, particularly now. You know, how do you pivot? And I think for us, it's about making those pivots, demonstrating that acumen, but really staying really committed to our guiding ambitions, which is how do we build a better business? How do we build a business that can really be thinking through, you know, how do we do this differently? Because we got some serious stuff and time is short. And so, yeah, so there's all of that.
So take me back a little bit. I hear a passion for business, a passion for fashion, and a passion for sustainability. Where were those seeds planted? I mean, were you 8? Were you 6? Where did these seeds planted that have now bloomed into Grant Boulevard, Build It Boldly? And I'm sure you got other things lined up. If you only started this in 2017, we're at the beginning of the story, not at the end.
Yes,
so,
we are.
But where did it all start? What made Kimberly excited about these topics enough to pour your time, talent, and ties into it?
I love that combination of the time, talent, and ties. I'm from the north side of Milwaukee, and that's a place that, for those of y'all who don't know Milwaukee, MLK called it the Selma of the North. It remains one of America's most racially segregated cities. If you're Black, you live on the north side. And, my parents bought a house at 2677 Grant Boulevard. They were postal workers, union workers. And so they were involved in leadership in the union. So I think from a very young age, I knew that my parents cared a lot about workers, and workers' rights and the preservation of workers' rights as a position for them. They were both involved in union leadership. And then, later my mother started volunteering at a women's correctional facility, just giving emotional support to women who are incarcerated. And I remember her, me being 9, 10, 11, her talking about the ways in which so often their choices were tied to domestic violence. That was something that we talked about. And then my father, when he wasn't working at the post office, he opened a business. He thought that he could see, before we had this language of food activism and food deserts, he could see how so many Black folk, how so many of us got locked away from just healthy access to healthier food options just because of where we lived. And so he opened a business that sat across from the KFC. He was a restaurateur, and he aspired to offer healthier food options. He grew a lot of what we actually ate at home. He took a lot of pride in his garden before this language of like urban agriculture and urban farming. Like we ate with my dad what we grew and outside of our house, behind our house. And so, I think that all of that, going back to your language of this fertile soil, I think my parents and their forward, both in terms of how they lived their lives, but their language about how they were making choices. And, all of those were a part of like just growing up on the north side. My father was a runner. We spent a lot of time at the lakefront on his jogs I didn't want to be on. My mom was a thrifter. I spent a lot of time in thrift stores I didn't want to be in. But I think when I look back on all of those stories, at least for that first half of my childhood, it was really so ripe, Alfred, for just like determining my values, right? And then when I was about maybe 14, 15, my mother she fell into a really deep depression and she left our family. And my father, in trying to navigate that crisis, he just got caught up in the crack cocaine epidemic, which was still very much so alive and well in Milwaukee. And so I've been on my own since I was about 14. And in that other half of my childhood, I had those values. I also was forced to really just kind of come face to face with the decisions, particularly young women consider when they're on their own, right? When they don't have a whole lot of family support. So I think the totality of those experiences built a really deep well of compassion, and a really, I think, just a lot of space for grace. And just, and working through all the things that my family, we've just navigated together and grown from together. And, my dad's doing really well now. He's enjoying retirement from the post office after 35 years of service. And, my mother, she just finished her master's degree and she's 61. She's really excited about going back and getting her doctorate. And so, it's just, life is just beautiful in that way. So yeah, all those things have all led to.
You are my people. You done said words, my favorite words: grace, fidelity, and just that whole narrative. You're my people. You're my people. I'm just saying. I feel you. I feel you, and I absolutely see how it's an example of a series of miracles that we too often take for granted in this world. That the things that people who argue are meant to destroy us actually gives us an opportunity to show grace, to develop fidelity, to develop values, to develop a sense of positive identity that makes what we went through not what defines us. And your parents and you, I mean, I'm just loving this. I'm just loving this. I'm getting way more out of this interview than I thought I was going to. That's already. We're only like 15 minutes in, and I'm already like, yes. So now you got to my other question, which was why Grant Boulevard, and I knew it had to have some type of significance, and now I know.
It's a story of place, but it's also, it's a story of two things for me. I mean, it's a story of home. So for me, it's a story of the global home. Like we're all a part of some neighborhood, some community. We're all a part of this planet. So the idea of anchoring this this brand and its journey and thinking about place and place-centered thinking is something that I've grown into. In the beginning, it was about the story of those experiences, but it's bigger. All across the country, there's a Grant Avenue. Like this story of Ulysses S. Grant is not lost on me, which is the story in which Grant Avenues and Grant Boulevards across the country are oftentimes named after. It's not lost on me, but it's also about facing things that are painful. When I first started Grant Boulevard, there were all this mining that I don't even think I had really recognized that I was entering into, that would become a part of just telling the story, having to let my parents know that, I was starting this company and I wanted to be really vulnerable about our family story and about the ways in which we've had to navigate, just life and living, and wanted to do that with tenderness. And so that's also a part of this. My parents we have so much compassion for each other, and so much, like going back to that sense of grace for what was and what isn't and the way forward. And I think that, that's what I really hope we are able to achieve with this business model, is not so much necessarily only living in what was, and what was is important, but it's also about thinking what's the way forward. What can the future look like if we're really radical about reimagining a new direction?
You said that point that there's a Grant Boulevard everywhere, and it just reminds me of the point that we made earlier, right before we came on air, about proximity being kind of a false standard for defining who your family is or who your tribe is. And so that you're right, we are all each other's neighbors. Our tribe members are all around the world, if we're but be open and gracious and vulnerable enough to say, here I am, who's with me, and to find out that who's with you could be anywhere and everywhere in the world if we just declare your values.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling
and if you lead with love, and if you lead
absolutely with, another one. So right. Like fidelity, grace, and love. You're just gonna hit all of them, right? Joy.
I mean, y'all, what are we doing? The planet is in a state of complete, it's really, y'all, we use this language, climate crisis, because it feels so more palatable. It's a gentle phrase, but the reality is, if you really, and I encourage everyone to become more familiar with the science of what's happening with the planet, it is catastrophic. And so, like, we do have some choices. I always think of the binary of choosing fear and choosing love. And I think that the way forward, and just being honest about that, is saying, like, yeah, it's crazy. This is about to get so much more significantly challenging. But if we can anchor ourselves in a different kind of relationship with each other, that's the only place where hope will live. And that's not to say there's no place for fear. We should be afraid of what we're up against, because it's really actually quite disastrous.
Well, fear was designed, just my opinion, it's an instinct for self-preservation. So fear is about freezing, is about taking action to reduce or eliminate the threat so that life and love can thrive.
That's right.
I tell people, I'm not one of those people who say, oh, fear has no place. Fear does have a place, but the goal of fear is to remind you that you have a choice to make, and that choice should be for your own survival and the survival of those in your community. And your community is the whole world.
That's right. That part.
Yes.
That part.
So take me to the nuts and bolts. Now I'm going to switch on to my entrepreneur. I'm a geek for entrepreneurs. That's the other thing. The way other people follow athletes and entertainers.
Oh.
I've been like that my whole career. I judge business pitch competitions primarily because I like getting exclusive looks at people's business plans. It's like, I want to know how you did that. I just love that whole thing. Talk to me about Grant Boulevard birth as a business. How did you start it? How did you build it? Who did you bring along? I saw on your website some of your team members and the skill sets they bring to the table. A lot of people can get a great idea. Most people, even me. But I always tell people the reason why I am not a traditional entrepreneur is because I'm an ideas guy, as a lifelong, and you really have to be good at execution. I can contribute ideas to other entrepreneurs. I do little small entrepreneurial things on the side, but the entrepreneurs I mentor that I celebrate the most, and they know it, they'll when they see this interview, they're going to know who I'm talking about. I'll call them the executioners, because I say if they say they're going to do something. If it fails, it's going to fail because they did it. It's not going to fail because they never got around to it.
Right.
They went and did it, and it either worked or it didn't work. Then they do the next thing. So talk to me about the execution of the creation of Grant Boulevard.
Yeah, no, when I started Grant Boulevard, all I knew, I had just finished watching Ava DuVernay's 13. So this is 2016. I had just come back I took a sabbatical from teaching. I traveled by myself to Kenya to really just spend some time with folks who are showing up in response to some human rights crisis and some environmental crisis. I spent some time in Scandinavia, really just looking at design thinking. And then I came back and I was like, you know what? I really feel like I'm called to figure out how I'm gonna find this new intersection. So we have this language now of intersectionality that we're becoming more comfortable with. But when I said in 2017, I wanted to build a brand that was being responsive to the criminal system's cruelties, people were like, you're doing too much. But what I was able to do, and I think it's because I was a teacher, I started by coming home I returned to the States, and I reached out to a woman who I really didn't know well, and now she's a dear friend of mine. She she continues to run a local fashion school in Philly. And I said, her name's Rachel, shout out to Rachel Ford. I said, Rachel, I want to learn about fashion. And, she had a 2-year program. And I said, but I don't really necessarily want to do the 2 full years. I don't want to be a designer. I want to understand if this is something I'm even interested in. Can I start at the capstone? So the final class in the 2-year program was the business of fashion. And I started there and kind of expanded my language around what was happening in fashion in terms of understanding supply chain and sourcing and notions and stitches and just just so I could talk to folk, right? And through her, I started figuring out who did I know and who didn't I know. And I met a seamstress and brought her on. And then, went from a build out. I knew I needed to get someone who could help me tell a story because I knew I needed to fundraise. And I knew that I needed to have a really compelling digital story to communicate what at the time was feeling kind of avant-garde for people. And so, I did that, figured that out. And then as I started thinking about, okay, well, what am I going to use this friends and family round? What am I going to use this funding for? And so I set some goals and decided what the strategy would be for how we were going to develop the content, what we were going to ask for, how we were going to reward people for joining us in this movement in sustainable fashion, and then building a team out from there. And as it were, I think one thing that business owners, I hope that many of us are learning, and I think a lot of us already know, is that you tap into your networks. You figure out who do you know, what skills do they have, what resources do they have, and then how do you build team around really getting honest with yourself about what you don't know. I knew I didn't know how to sew. I also knew I didn't need to know how to sew. I knew that what I needed was to be able to find someone who I convinced that the vision for this brand was one that had longevity. And so, as it were, I had a cousin who was she was around the way. She was in South Philly. She was the person that people would call for those couture prom dresses. So if you were in South Philly and you were Black and you were like, I want something that's like Met Gala, award show, incredible. Nevada Gray was the person that a lot of people were going to. And it just so happened that we have the same great grandmother. And so I was just like, okay, Veda, this is what I think I think we can pull this off. And she was just like, cuz I don't know nothing about sustainability. Okay. I don't know nothing about that, but I'm gonna go with you. And we're still going.
That is so cool. That is so cool. I mean, one of the things, and we're still celebrating the life of our late founder, Earl Grey Sr., who passed away in 2020. And I'm always quoting him because he's literally the biggest influence on my life as a man. And he would always say that business is personal. Whoever builds the best relationships wins. And that this idea of being able to, whether it's your existing tribe or to recruit other people in your tribe, like I said, they don't have to even know or believe the things that you believe or do. Like I said, Earl Grey Sr. was not a journalist, not a writer, not an editor, none of that. He was like, but I know how to find and inspire the people who are passionate about that, me being one of them over the years, and put together a company. So you're like, no, you found the right person who could put together some fly gear. That's
right. That's right. That's what I needed. And I needed someone, every business is different and has its niche, but I knew I needed people who had some value alignment. And I think when we're thinking about social enterprise, which is one of the things that distinguishes it from other business models where it's like you're receiving goods, you're marking them up, you're selling them. There's something to be said about having someone whose values align in social enterprise, because if they're not values aligned, when you face the challenges of the kind of radical experimentation and disruption that I'm interested in, it won't work. Like when I say to you, I'm bringing you 4 or 5 people and all of them have criminal histories, it's got to be someone who understands the importance of making space for folks from that community and that experience. And so, yeah, same thing with sustainability, like while she's, I find her to be such a remarkable story of how, sometimes even when folks don't think they know about sustainability, how we can all grow in our language and our practice and our lifestyles just from exposure, so now, she can see all the greenwashing. That's what we call it, y'all. When folks are saying that they're doing something that's climate friendly and they really on some trash. Right. She can find all the greenwashing, and that's a journey, right? So that was a big part of it. A big part of this launch was, so many of us as Black folk, we all know this, particularly those of you who have experimented with business ownership or business expansion, we face significant barriers to being able to get the resources we need, the capital we need to get off the ground. And so I leveraged my professional relationships. I reached out. I was I don't want to use the word shameless. I was super excited about giving and people an opportunity to join me in building something that was super disruptive. And then I leveraged that and I did what I said I was going to do. I said, you guys give me this money, your hard earned money, right? And I'm going to launch a studio space. And then I went out another year later and said, thank you for that. We're good. We've done that. This is this footage of this studio space we launched. Now I want to move into a brick and mortar. What we putting on the brick and mortar, and I think that that's a part of what this work requires is building community and really earning trust. Showing folks that when they give you their trust, that it's well deserved.
And that's why execution is so important. It's easy to back somebody who is going to do what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. It's so important. Mm-hmm. I want to get back to this idea of you doing too much. In this context. And let me say, all the best entrepreneurs I know, both the famous ones and not so famous ones, do too much, if you will. And I don't mean from a workload standpoint, I mean from a vision standpoint. Right. So, I can see people now who could say, well, okay, so you got this fashion thing, and I get you have the sustainability, but then on top of that, you're going to care about, formerly incarcerated people, and on top of that, you're going to deal with how the clothes are made, and you're going to do how many layers of and I can see somebody saying, why can't pick a lane? Right. But all the exceptional entrepreneurs I know, they refuse to pick a lane. They're like, if it aligns with the core values of the business, then it belongs in the business. And if we can build the capacity to do it, we should do it. Talk to me about the goals you set for being able to serve so many different areas of social impact with a legitimately functioning built business.
I think that two things. I think it's easier to think about where those lanes, going back to the word intersection, where the lanes intersect when you're working. So one thing that was, I think, worked to our advantage, which is going to be maybe a little bit of a harder pivot. And I know that as our businesses get established, moving them they're just bulkier, right? They're larger, so the movement is harder. But for me, in building a business that's from its DNA was already thinking about these considerations, it actually made the way forward, the policies, the procedures, the people, it made it easier because I knew from the beginning what our foundation was in terms of, what was the value alignment that we wanted to create and what was the value proposition that we wanted to offer. And so I think that was something that kind of worked in our favor in terms of, just like round up business strategy. I think that, there are challenges to thinking about centering the planet. One of those challenges is that the supply chain is so full of problematic practices. Right. And so that there's you can only do so much when in a built landscape, right? And so for us, one of those workarounds is thinking about hyper-local as one of those guiding philosophies. How do we source things locally? We produce about 90% of what we sell. So that gives us a lot more control. I think in fashion, one of the things that brands struggle with and what's normalized is, we are able to get fabrics for very cheap because we don't have a sense of who produced them. If we're talking about garments that are already constructed, we're completely out of touch with how those women, because it is disproportionately women, it's disproportionately girls, what the conditions are that they work under. And I think that for us, because I, as a CEO, can control those things, it makes those things a lot easier. I think the other thing that is also built into the landscape of this particular this model for disruption is we're working through cultivating our own workforce. So, like one of the things we're doing is we're partnering with a local nonprofit to build out Fashion for the Future, which is a program that supports us in teaching women who are criminal sister impacted how to sew, and then that becomes our workforce. So it's a workforce development aim, initiative that kind of falls into our other aims. So it's a lot about intentionality. It's a lot about delegation. It's a lot about it's a lot about teaching. For me in this, I'm a particular kind of CEO because what we're doing hasn't been done before. And that means I really have to lead differently than if we're, working in industries where there's like a little bit more robust examples in terms of what the way forward should be.
Again, as I told you, I love fashion. I'm that guy that if the Devil Wear Prada comes on at any point in the movie, I got to stop and watch whatever's left. I just love, I love the whole thing. And I loved it before I knew what to call it. When I was a kid growing up on, in a small town on the Jersey Shore. But the thing that I've become really conscious of over the last, I would say 15 years, and maybe even more intensely the last 10, is things you've already touched upon. Who's making it? What is it made of? The issue of plastics in our environment is a huge catastrophic situation. And we think of plastic bags, we don't think of the plastic that goes in the making of so many materials that we use for shoes and clothes and bags, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the toxicity of waste that produces. Fashion, the worldwide fashion industry is actually a very messy, dirty, not morally dirty necessarily, but dirty in the real sense.
Yeah.
Industry. And you just think of the, whatever the beautiful things that it might produce, we don't think of the waste that is left behind and often left behind on the shores, neighborhoods, backyards, drinking water, food supply of not only here in America, but in countries around the world that affects everything else, health, economic opportunity, educational opportunity. Just, and to me, the juxtaposition between this beautiful, glamorous industry, whether you're making it, wearing it, modeling it, buying it, and then what it takes to create and run that industry. And I'm including things like colognes and perfumes and the whole nine. Mm-hmm. It seems like a big thing to tackle for an entrepreneur like you. I mean, I know you're doing it where you can do it, but yeah. I think, like you said, it's going to take a lot of teaching because I'm somebody who's been halfway paying attention, and it's still I'm constantly amazed at what the challenges are in it. And we're only talking about one industry, fashion, but still.
Yeah, no, I think that the global changes that we need, and when I say global, I mean like we think about the entire world, but I'm thinking even in terms of in every industry, right? In every sector, every business sector, right? Which, because of globalization, it is global, but in every sector, we're going to need a new class of leaders who are experimenting with what the way forward could be, from their packaging to their, how they're thinking about carbon footprint and their shipping, to thinking about, how they're paying their workers, to what the quality of their cleaning supplies are, and what those cleaning supplies, the impact of even cleaning supplies on local water streams. And what you mentioned Build It Boldly, which is this effort at trying to share what I've learned with entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out, what is it that I need to be considering as I move forward and improving the quality of my business leadership? Because that's what this boils down to is, there are so many ways of measuring what it means to be successful in business. And based on, and so, we live in a capitalist society, and oftentimes the only thing that has ever mattered is profit, right? That was the justification for slavery, is this real focus on profit. But what I hope people are coming into, and what I'm really excited to share with people, is that there are other ways of measuring what the benefits, the impact, the legacy of your business can be in alignment with profit. Profit matters. Your business can't keep going. You can't pay your workers if you're not profitable. But there are ways in which you can think about your policies, procedures, or practices that show some real maturity and some real leadership in your business acumen if you're able to also center your people and this our planet. And that's on all of us, whether you're a solo practitioner in your LLC or you're employing 5,000 people. It's incumbent on all of us to figure out how do we do better, right? That's the goal. How do we do better?
You know, the idea of profit being necessary but not the point. You know, whether you're nonprofit or for-profit, yes, you need profits because profit is how you fuel the operation.
That's
yes,
right.
It is important, and you're right. The more fuel you have, the better fuel you have, the bigger the engine, the further you can go, the more work you can do. I get that. I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to the point where you think the whole point is to get as much gas as you can, or get as much fuel as you can, regardless of the price of the acquisition of the fuel, right. That's when I think, speaking as a person, obviously born and raised in a capitalist society, I think that's when we get off track. It's about how much money can we make at all costs.
At all costs.
At all costs.
And I think about, going back to the fashion industry as a particular example of where that extraction model has been so problematic. Part of the reason why there's so many levels of harm caused by the fashion industry is because the roots of it are actually in American slave. Like a major part of the current fashion industry is so predicated on the growth of cotton through slave labor in America, right? And then the Industrial Revolution and what that fueled in terms of, the speed with which we get to this thing called fast fashion, which is these production cycles that create so much waste, so much consumption and so much waste that we don't have enough landfills to take care of all of it. These companies that are working through these business models that say, we only want people to have two wears because we want them to come back. We don't care about what happens to that garment once it's been worn twice. It can fall apart. It can be thrown in the trash. They'll be back. We want them back. We're incentivizing them to keep purchasing. All of that consumptive behavior, it has consequences. So yes, I love fashion, y'all. I want to sell fashion. I want y'all to buy everything Grant Boulevard exclusively. And that is our ambition as a company, right? How do we become a beacon for incredible design in terms of a reliable aesthetic and a high quality garment? But also, how do we shift consumer thinking about what should be demanded from fashion brands?
Talk to me. Now I want to get into some of the fun side. And also want you to talk about what you want to talk about. I know I could hold you for another 4 hours because I'm loving all of this. But talk to me about, let's take the sustainability and the social impact and all the other stuff off the table and talk about Grant Boulevard as just a great place to get some fly gear. Talk to me about what your vision is for that. Are we going to see Grant Boulevards in other cities and towns? Or what is your vision? Or are we going to see Grant Boulevard products distributed through larger retail outlets? Where are you looking to take it?
The goal for the company has always been, how do we create living wage jobs for Black folk, right? For Latinx folk, for brown folk who, because of our, just as the larger landscape that we're navigating, we oftentimes just get shut out, and recognizing that, having work cultures that pay living wage and are culturally healthy, it's a special thing. I'd love to be able to offer that to communities across the country, particularly where there are high rates of recidivism, which is this cycle of folks coming in and out of prison. And I'd love to do that in a way that's actually integrated, where all of my employees are not formally incarcerated people. They're currently not all incarcerated people, but bringing together people who have a diversity of life experiences into healthy work culture as a way of just developing healthier communities. So the ambition for Grant Boulevard is to be able to do that across the country, so like we're expanding we moved our studio to our brick and mortar. Now we're moving into what will be a $500,000 build out for another facility that's just the maker space for our Fashion for the Future, initiative, and then to get some really sound data on how do we replicate that. My ambition is for Grant Boulevard, and this is the C-suite's ambition, is that we show up in cities across the country. We're interested next in DC as a secondary market, and then moving into Baltimore as a third, and then making our way out west to the Bay Area. And then establishing roots across the country where we're working in tandem with nonprofits who are supporting particularly reentry work to build ecosystems that are challenging a lot of the issues around poverty, but also around, access to work and training and, the skills folks need to be self-sufficient, which oftentimes, just because of poverty, so many of us don't get.
Talk to me about your vision as a CEO for yourself. And I come to this question with almost every entrepreneur I get a chance to talk to, whether it's for an interview or just over dinner or over lunch, because again, I'm a geek for entrepreneurship. When I say I'm a geek for entrepreneurship, it's for the entrepreneur themselves, who I always say, as the visionary, you are the company's most important asset. Even if you ultimately decide to let someone else be the CEO, or even if you sell the business, the vision lives beyond you if you can get it right. And that means, your ability to sustain yourself emotionally, physically, spiritually, is critical, because the health of the business, especially at this stage of your business, is literally tied to your own health and well-being. Talk to me about how you approach life as a CEO. This is important to me because other entrepreneurs look to other entrepreneurs as models. Obviously, that's what Black Enterprise is all about. We want to try to showcase the people who are doing it best, so other people who are trying to figure it out can say, that Kimberly McGlonn, I'm going to do things differently to navigate this more successfully, because I got to hear, or I got to meet her at the Entrepreneur Summit, which is the whole point of trying to bring everybody together. We can learn from one another. We can avoid repeating mistakes that have already been made. Maybe we can make a new set of mistakes for ourselves. But I'm always curious about, how does the visionary take care of the most important asset of the business, which is themselves, which is actually more important than the business, because businesses come and go.
Right.
You're still Kimberly McGlonn with a life. You had a life before Grant Boulevard. You had value before Grant Boulevard. And 50 years from now, you may be delivering value in a whole different way, but you're still Kimberly McGlonn. Talk to me about how you approach, what we call work-life balance, whatever people call it, in such a way that's healthy for you as well as healthy for your venture.
I really appreciate that nuance of your understanding of like the separation between our identities as humans and the work that we do. I think that that's something that that we don't hear often enough. And I also really appreciate that sense of affirmation, because I think that's one important thing we can offer each other, both in business leadership and outside of it, a recognition of our humanity outside of, our titles, right? I think for me, it's a combination of things, it's like really creating a sense of like sacred time to be in nature. Like that's one thing I find nature is such a restorative place. So I like to hike. That's one thing that I do that gives me some space to recalibrate and reconsider and to reset. I think that I still very much so enjoy, I like solo travel. It's not for everyone. I started Grant Boulevard, this journey of like figuring out this chapter in a solo travel experience. I think that there's something to be said about adventuring alone. I think it's like actually one of the most compelling metaphors for the experience of business ownership and leadership, is that in some ways you're always adventuring alone. I read a lot of philosophy, like I recently finished a book called The Gift of Change by Marianne Williamson, reading All About Love by Bell Hooks, looking at The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. So for me, I find a lot of value in diverse, and diverse philosophy about the total, like the whole thing, right? So particularly those works that tackle all the things that it means that make us who we are, how we show up in community, how we show up for ourselves, how do we lead lives where there's some flexibility around navigating the unknown. Another book I really love is by David White. He happens to be a poet philosopher. He wrote a book called The Crossing the Unknown Sea, about the pilgrimage of work. It's a beautiful book. So I find myself in those grooves of setting aside time throughout the week to either read or to be out in nature, sometimes reading and out in nature. And in my tribe, I think it's really great when you have a diverse group of people who can show up for you in different capacities. No one person can carry the burden of all the things you do. So I think it's really important to have a wide net of support of people who you can go to, whose values align with yours, and who have a lot of space and capacity to give you space to be able to just process all of the things. And I think oftentimes that exists outside of your team. Your team wants you to be a voice of reassurance and a voice of guidance. And I think that sometimes it means that we have a lot of distance from the people who are showing up for us in terms of like the actual the maintenance of the business itself. So I often lean to people outside of the business just to kind of stay in that lane. And I'm really judicious about what I'm vulnerable about with my team. I don't want to, it's sometimes a little treacherous, and you got to figure out, what you're saying, what you're not saying. Right. But it's a combination of those things, it's all of those things I think are a big part of just of the staying alive. And the last thing I want to say is, I think of my life between the hosting the podcast and producing that and running the company and offering my insight to other business owners. Think of it as a house with many rooms. I'm not in every room at the same time. When I'm in a room, I really aspire to be present in that room. The light is on. I know the bill is being, the light is on. I'm spending money to be in this room. I'm in that room. And when I leave that room, I turn off the light and I close the door, or I'll leave the door open, but I turn off the light, recognizing that I can't be in every place at one time. So I think a real important tip for all people, both in business ownership and in family leadership, is be present, really working on a practice of presence.
I love that metaphor. If it's my life, in the current stage of my life, I live in a house with many rooms, but I can't be in every room at the same time. And I'm hearing my mother say, "You're not in that room. Turn off that light." Like, why are the lights on in the house?
Yes.
It's a great metaphor. Why are you wasting energy, draining energy, even in a latent sense, because you got the light on in another room in the house that you're not presently in? Turn off that light. Be in the room that you're in. Great.
That's right.
That's really wonderful. That leads into what I was about to ask you. You're giving me what I want before I ask for it. Give me 2 or 3 key pieces of advice for entrepreneurs, and I'm going to tailor it a little bit, who want to do a venture that is different, that doesn't necessarily follow the model of the past. I hear everything you're saying about you being a teacher, and you, in a way, because of what the values of your business, you may be able to use existing traditional business models as a jumping off point, but it can't be the model that you follow if you want to get different results than what traditional business pursues and results in. There are entrepreneurs out there that want to do something disruptive. I mean, you are a business disruptor of the year. Disruptor is an overused term today in business, but you are actually doing something. You're actually creating something on a different set of values with different objectives, but it's still a legitimate business model. What would be maybe 2 pieces of advice you would give to someone that wants to have similar impact, social and otherwise, with their business, but they still want to build a successful business?
I think one thing I want to say is, I think that I'm going to speak directly to those folk. I think you should aspire to work in partnership and in tandem. Like while someone can look at your business model and see what your guiding values are, and they can see, what you're setting up as your driving kind of ambitions, you don't need to do it alone. And I'm going to tell you why you can't do it alone, is because some of the things that this kind of new business model require is a collaboration with folks who understand things that you don't understand, right? If you're going to really think about, you identify your, and that's one thing, do it in partnership. But the second advice I want to give you is, I really hope that you can get honest with yourself about where you observe something that really rattles you, because that is a lighthouse for the direction you should be moving in. And once you are honest with yourself, I think you can really set yourself up for some really liberating transformation in terms of your own life experience, right? By facing something that's challenging. And you can also figure out how you can most be of service in a place that is uniquely your place to be in service. And you don't have to do that alone. So I think you work on cultivating partnerships with folks who understand the nuances of that community and its needs. You listen as a part of that partnership in deference to what their observations are about what that landscape looks like and what that community needs, and don't go in necessarily as a savior, go in as a person who wants to be humble about figuring out how to be of service. The goal in aspiring to build a business that sits outside of a traditional extraction only profit as the heart of all decision-making model is that you actually have a really powerful opportunity to, through your business, actually be setting up your legacy in terms of its value culturally in a way that, only exclusively centering profit doesn't necessarily allow you to do. So get honest with yourself about what it is that really, really bothers you about what you're observing about the place that you come from or the place that you live in. Work with people who are also interested, in community with people who are interested also in really doing something has a real perspective of change agency. And then as you're doing that work, just be really proud of the fact that you are aspiring to think about your legacy from a broader lens than just profit.
That is so powerful. That's so powerful. I mean, just the whole model of, it's not all about extraction, You take something as basic as farming, and you talk about your father and his relationship with food and farming and gardening, that farms fail when it's all extraction. Like, you get maximum productivity in the short run, it'll make that land barren and unproductive in the long run.
That's right.
And you talked about, this fast fashion trend. That's literally what it is. It's like, we're going to extract, and then it'll be barren. It'll be barren. But we'll have ours. We'll be gone. But what we'll leave behind is destructive.
And the legacy will just only be felt by their immediate ancestors. Like their and it just doesn't have to be that way. Like, we've seen that model play out in who is in the 1%. And I really think we have to just ask a question: is, when we look at the totality of what the people who we think we admire most, of what they offer, and then what they've taken, I think we just have to, this is a really incredible moment to be reevaluating what we are celebrating. Yeah. And so I'm really grateful for the Black Enterprise and this summit for really creating some space to highlight and to amplify our ambition to do what is, make no mistake about it, hard. Right. Yeah. I don't want anyone to walk away from this and think it's just like doing something that's disruptive and that centers a balance of purpose and planet and people in alignment with profit, that's easy. It's not easy. It takes a lot of perseverance. It takes a lot of thought leadership. It takes a lot of figuring out how do we conquer all of the struggles that Black entrepreneurs across this country have. But I can say this to you, that it's work I'm incredibly proud of. And, I'm so happy that my daughter, who will be 14 on Sunday, that she is being able to bear witness to knowing that her mother did not lay down, that she really aspired through her time and her talent and her tithing to try to model a different way.
That says it all, really. I mean, what she thinks and what she's going to leave to the next generation, that's what legacy is all about. And so I'm really totally with that. Listen, in the time we have left, tell people about Grant Boulevard, where it is, where they can get the clothes. Tell people about the Build It Boldly community. I don't know who's eligible or how that works.
Yes.
Definitely to make sure people know where to find your podcast, School for Disruptors.
Yes, y'all. Okay, so if you're shopping 24/7, which so many of us are, because we really are, we all trying to do all the things, you can head over to our website at www.grantboulevard.com. That's GrantBLVD.com. And you'll see the ways in which we're approaching sustainable design and the story of our team all there for you. If you are online, if you're on the gram, you can follow us at Grant Boulevard, same thing, GrantBLVD. You can also shop us in Philadelphia. If you're in West Philly, University City District, we're at 36 in Lancaster. Slide by, say hello. We'd love to meet you in person. And then for Build It Boldly, if you're a business owner, you're thinking about, how do I change up my approach? How do I think differently about how I tell the story of what we're doing or what I care about? Build It Boldly is a great way to get some support. There's a digital community with a mixture of some courses and some direct access to me. So you can find that at builditboldly.com. And you can also follow us on the gram at build.it.boldly. I would be happy to guide you in those ways. And School for Disruptors, if you just like my thoughts, if you're interested in how I think about failure, success, crisis, you can find that on anywhere you listen to your wherever you get your podcast. So iTunes, Spotify, it's School for Disruptors.
And listen, guys, join us at the Black Enterprise Entrepreneur Summit this coming week, where you can meet Kimberly personally, celebrate her as I will be celebrating. You hear a lot of noise in the audience. It won't be just family, friends. It'll be me making all kinds of noise. But yeah, we're in Philly, May 18th through the 20th at the Pennsylvania Convention Center. We're going to be honoring Kimberly and a bunch of other outstanding Black entrepreneurs on Thursday the 19th. It's going to be a great way to connect and hit all of these themes, Kimberly, that you talked about during our conversation today. So yeah, and I'll be there. Come see me. Come see me in Philadelphia at the Black Enterprise Entrepreneur Summit, May 18th through 20th at the Pennsylvania Convention Center. Kimberly, man, I know this can't be our last conversation. We're going to still stick to the original idea, which is we were going to get together, we were going to meet up. So this is for the gram, for the audience, but
yes,
you and I got to connect and talk some more. I really appreciate you, especially on such short notice, agreeing to be my guest on Beyond the Hype. Thank you.
Happy to be here with you all.
And you just heard another amazing edition of Beyond the Hype. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive Editor-at-Large at Black Enterprise. See you next episode. And also, I do hope to see you in Philadelphia at the Entrepreneur Summit. Take care. Be well. Bye-bye.